This episode is brought to you by Magic Spoon. Growing up, cereal was one of the best parts of being a kid, but I had to give it up because I realized it just wasn't worth the sugar or the calories as I was getting older. That's where Magic Spoon comes in. Magic Spoon has 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving. It's also only 140 calories in each serving. Magic Spoon is keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, low-carb, and GMO-free. You can also build your own box. The available flavors to build your own custom bundle are cocoa, fruity, frosted, peanut butter, blueberry, and cinnamon. All of those flavors are going to take you guys right back to being a kid and enjoying those cereals that you used to love. Go to magicspoon.com/maze to grab a custom bundle of cereal and try it today. And be sure to use our promo code MAZE at checkout to save $5 off your order. Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember, get your next delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/maze and use the code MAZE to save $5 off. Thank you to Magic Spoon for sponsoring this episode.
This is the Athletic Football Show.
Welcome to the Athletic Football Show. I'm Robert Mays. Joining me today is my good friend Nate Tice. Nate, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. I had no draft prep for it feels like the first time in since the season ended. We had the normal draft and then we had our little athletic drafts. So I was like, okay, now we're back to just encouraging each other's opinions as opposed to maybe dragging each other down.
I think dragging each other down every once in a while was a good thing. We may do. I don't think we're going to do a draft next week, but I think we are going to do some sort of ranking superlative with coaches. A lot of people have asked for that, honestly, after we did the player draft podcast. People said, are you going to do something similar with front offices or coaches? And I said, you know what? That is a good idea because I'm out of ideas. So I appreciate you letting me have that one. So I think we're going to do something like that next week. Today, though, we're going to talk about Julio Jones in a second because we haven't really done that on the show. But after that, we're going to do something that I feel like taps into one of my favorite conversations or thought exercises associated with the NFL. One of my favorite things to do every spring is talk to coaches about what they're watching. You know this as somebody who was a quality control guy for a while. A lot of times the offseason is on projects. So a coach or a staff will go watch every play action pass that the best play action pass team did, or every red zone snap from the best red zone team. I remember talking to an offensive play caller about he watched all of the Titans play action passes just as a way to get a sense of, okay, why are they good at this? And I love that as an exercise. So that's kind of what we did. We went back and watched the best offenses in the league over the last couple days. Probably too much work for June, if we're being honest with each other. But we went back and I did the same sort of thing. It was focused. I watched every Titans play action pass. I watched every Bills this situation, every Browns certain situations, just to get a sense. And we wanted to talk about the lessons we learned from that process. So we went through something that most coaches go through, and I thought that distilling that would be illuminating and a really fun way to talk about the best teams in the league last season and what that might mean moving forward. Before we do that, we have not really talked about Julio on this show. Our content has kind of been removed from the news cycle over the last couple weeks, which has been on purpose because there's usually not a news cycle at this time of year. But he is a massive name. There's a ton of interest, obviously, and there should be. So I wanted to ask you, is there a spot you think makes the most sense for him or a spot you think he should go, and are those the same?
Oh, man. Oh, I mean, my heart is saying the 49ers. Yes. Like heart of all hearts right there. It's with Julio. We talk about it. It's like the top tier guys are scheme proof. So it's like, I kind of want to see him everywhere because it'd just be so much fun to picture Julio here or Julio here. But if I heart of hearts, I would say the 49ers or the Packers, ideally, I just want to see that. And the 49ers, of course, makes so much sense with Kyle Shanahan being there. But then, Titans makes a lot of sense as well, just with what they have is dearth of need, but or dearth of talent in that position, the need there. But it's one of those things where it's like my brain tells me some things, and then it's like, well, are they going to do that? And it's more like I just want to see it, like NBA, almost becoming an NBA fan, where it's just like the superstars change every year or 2 years, and you get to see all the configurations of all these players and stuff. I kind of want that to happen a little bit with Julio.
The Packers I didn't even think about that. I mean, that would be awesome because he's essentially just a supercharged version of all of the other outside receivers they have, except for Devontae. Yeah. He's just MVS cranked up to like 15 is what Julio Jones is. So that would be awesome to watch. I think the Titans makes the most sense from two different, from a football level, you can just see it. I mean, he fits what they do. Vertical shots, play action. I mean, we'll talk about this. They run a concept that's essentially a bench route from the outside receiver and an over from the guy on the backside. Julio running that bench that's just vertical and out. That's what Julio does. I mean, it's not even difficult to imagine him in that offense. And I also think in terms of the logistics of it, I know they don't have the cap room. They've got like $3 million in space, and they don't have a lot of levers to pull either. I was looking at ways they could save money. There are no real obvious cuts there. They would really have to borrow from the bank of Ryan Tannehill. I think his base salary is $24.5 million. Do you want to be doing that? Ryan Tannehill is like 32 years old. I mean, that's something that's a breaking case of emergency thing, but I think the Titans are in a breaking case of emergency place because with that Tannehill contract, with the Henry contract, they're in win now mode, baby. I mean, they did that to try to pry open this championship run that they could have, and I think that they've gotten worse by losing Corey Davis, by losing Jonnu Smith, not the most important pieces on their team, but incremental steps back on offense for them. And I think that Julio solves that. He solves that in a big way. The money is a question because they have urgency. I won't call them desperate because they have some urgency to do this. Maybe there's a chance they're willing to give up more draft capital if Atlanta takes a portion of the salary. And I think that's going to be the sliding scale, right? There aren't that many teams that can fit the $15 million base under their cap right now. Is Atlanta willing to take a little bit of that back to them if they can get a better pick from somebody that doesn't have the wiggle room right now? So I think Tennessee makes the most sense from a football perspective. I mean, if you're the Jags, you got $39 million in space.
Something.
Send Chenault back. Just say in a sweetener because that regime didn't pick him, all of that. So I think those two make sense. I mean, I think that the 49ers is a really, really fun one. They have the money. Also, the 49ers have a $25 million lever to pull if they want to. They can release Garoppolo anytime. And it changed this entire thing. I know that's not, they would be doing him really wrong there, but again, that's an option for them. So if they really want a guy like Julio, and I think with the 49ers, it's a couple different considerations. He's very different than the other guys that they have.
Yes.
So
the synergy's great.
Yes. And so those three together, you can see it, but they don't have three guys on the field together very often. I mean, I want to say they were in 11 personnel on like 55% of their snaps last year. It was the second lowest rate in the league. I think Tennessee was number one. and so, which is funny.
That's actually kind of funny.
But they have a glaring need at that other receiver spot. With the Niners, having Samuel and Ayuk and Julio together on the field, I mean, that's awesome. That's awesome. An incredible complementary group, but they just don't play like that very often. So which guy is going to lose time? Do you want to block one of their developments by having Julio get some of those snaps? I think those are the considerations you have to take into account.
And also this is another added benefit of going young at quarterback is all of a sudden you get more wiggle room to work with. That's the one little fun that I know you trade up first rounders for him, but it's like, hey, when you get a young guy that's a stud, it's like, wow, we have a lot more flexibility to do things like, I don't know, adding Julio Jones to our receiving core. I do. That's exactly why I was excited about it with the 49ers. It's just that synergy with those guys. Like even with Deebo Samuel turning into this kind of, I don't want to say gadget guy because that's almost like a slur, but like a just all around weapon, because I don't want to say Swiss Army knife because but it's like he just does all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of, man, it's just fun because now Ayuk doesn't have to be the guy. He can still develop along but he could take a leap, even like he doesn't have to take a leap. So when it gradually progresses, it's like, ooh, that's really fun. He doesn't have as much on his plate, and that makes sense. Julio at the X. You got Ayuk at the Z. You got Debo moving around. Z that can move inside. It's like, oh my God, that's some fun stuff. So just more creativity that they can do. That's why it just makes so much sense. And then the Packers is just like you said. It's just like that's just a supercharged version. And Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers, and Julio Jones on the field at the same time would just be like just football nirvana.
One of the coolest parts about him though is that Julio's a space creator. Like the fact that he's a clear out guy still at age 32 because he has that vertical pushability. And that's why with the Niners, it makes sense because he creates space for those other guys. I mean, I was looking at some of the numbers. I think Josh Hermsmeyer posted them the other day. His miles per hour, Julio's even last year and over the last 5 years, it hasn't diminished at all. Like he is still as fast as he's ever been when he's healthy. And it's just crazy that you have a 220-pound guy who can be your vertical option within that offense. And with the Niners and those two other guys, that's what he would be.
Yep. Well, that's what it's so funny when I've told the story a few times, but just different versions of it or different parts of the same meeting. When Kyle Shanahan came to the Falcons, he was showing his core plays and why why each position he likes certain guys because I like these plays, so this is why. So he's showing the receivers. He's like, I like this at X, I like this at Z. So he showed Andre Johnson at X, and then he just started showing all these Washington clips and going like, hey, I really love this concept, play action concept. Blaze and all this stuff, and we have the the glance, the drift route, and the post. And he's showing it, and he goes, and someone's like, oh, so what's your idealized version of having the like on our roster right now being the guy that takes the top off? And he goes, without missing a beat, Shanahan goes, Julio. And then they're like, okay, we talk, and then we're talking about the next route, like the dig, the drift, and he's like, so who's your idealized version of this? And he goes, Julio. He's like, he goes, that's what's really nice about having a guy like Julio. I don't need one of the guys. I just have him. Everybody else can figure out the other roles. He does everything, and it's great. And that's what that type of guy can do. It's gonna be awesome. It's funny too, like you were just saying. Oh, the Titans, like what's so exciting, like seeing them in that type of offense. And it's like that's why we were excited to see Julio with Arthur Smith.
Exactly. I know. That's why it's such a bummer.
It's so weird. It's like I know, but I feel like it's like, hey, we might still get to see it. So I know. I'm curious to see where Julio ends up because it's just like I watched the last game he played last year. He missed some time. He played this game against the Saints, and then he missed the rest of the season. It's like, dude, he's still there. He's still Julio. It's like he's pulling away from everybody. He looks like a monster on every snap, and it's like, yeah, okay, you're fine. Okay, if you're worried about getting 90% of Julio, it's 90% of Julio Jones, who's going to be a monster.
This is a weird thing to say, but I think people don't appreciate how good he is. Like maybe this is just me being my brain being warped by the internet. And just a couple stray takes that aren't actually indicative of the overall conventional wisdom about him. I don't think people understand how good he is at football. And the fact that even as recently as 2 years ago in 2019, I think he was still the best receiver in the league. That guy is unlike any other receiver I have ever seen. We talked about it with Matt Ryan a little bit. I can't remember a 220-pound. I tweeted this the other day. There have been 5 guys in the last 20 years that were at least 6'3", 220, and ran sub 4.35 at the combine. 2 of them are DK Metcalf and Julio Jones. The difference between those 2 guys is that Julio moves and stops and starts like a 6-foot, 190-pound slot receiver. His ability to throttle down and run those comebacks and the blaze outs and all of that stuff. I've never seen someone with that skill set since I've been paying attention to the NFL. Calvin Johnson was obviously a monster, but it was different. It wasn't like that with the precision that Julio plays the position like. And again, I just don't think people are appreciating that unicorn-esque set of skills enough. Like he, to me, is the most talented receiver I have watched in the post-Randy Moss era when it comes to all the little things he does. I think that Calvin Johnson can be a more physically dominant force than Julio Jones is just because of the size. But when you're talking about all the buckets, I don't think there's anybody like Julio that I have watched in the past 5 to 8 years.
What you're talking about with the throttle down stuff, that's the difference. It's the coming in, the explosiveness in and out of breaks. It's startling at times. It looks fake because you underappreciate it until you start seeing other guys doing the same routes he does. And then you're like, oh, that looks different. That guy doesn't fire out full speed after like running an 18, 20-yard route, stopping on a dime, and then coming out of the break at full speed. Like he didn't even stop. And it's like, that's kind of stuff is just so rare. And like you said, I'm so glad you said post Randy Moss world, because I was like, all right, tread carefully here. But no, you're right. I mean, since Randy's gone, I mean, He's the unicorn. It's a generational talent. Like we just got to, I can't believe we're talking like this at 32 years old. It's not like he's 38. Like it's like he still has gas in the tank, and it's that top tier gas that, it really is. He's something else.
What would you give up for him if you were a contender with the space? Would you give up a first round pick for him right now?
I would give up a late if I knew a real contending team, like
if you're Green Bay,
team,
if you're Green Bay and you're willing to move the money around. Yeah,
because that pick's gonna be, if say it's like the 28th pick, somewhere in that range. If you're expecting to be in the Final Four, which the Packers are, it's like that's worth it. I mean, because that's a total needle mover, and you can appease your quarterback a little bit too.
Well, that's my thought is that like, all right, so Rodgers is at a $37 million cap number right now. You do some magic. You give him an extension. You push some money out. You do the same thing with Devontae, who's at 16.8 right now. The type of stuff they don't typically want to do. That's what it would require. It would require stepping outside of themselves with their financial habits in a similar way to what the Bucs did to get all their guys back, and in a way that Rodgers wants. I mean, this is the type of thing he's been asking for them to do this. So I don't know. I think it's pie in the sky type stuff, but that's the type of team where just do it. Just do it. This is the way that you pry open this thing and finally get it over the top.
Yeah, it's a star. It's a star.
One of the stars of stars, even at this age.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, he's a good player that you hope he could become a star. It's like, no, he's a star. These are the guys you go after.
All right. So let's get to our lessons here. We came up with 5. The way I did this is I watched some teams and then I tried to broaden the lessons and combine some of them and everything else. So we landed on 5. So I want you to start us off. When you watched the best offenses in the NFL over the last week, what was the first takeaway that you had?
Yeah, and the one I'm going to start with is not only is just the run game as important as ever, and it's not just like an efficiency thing. I think what's kind of turning is explosiveness. His teams are really, that's what you're trying to create, is explosiveness throughout your entire offense, but really in the run game as well. If we're not going to run the ball 25 times anymore, we're going to run it 15 to 17. It's like we got to start gaining more than 4 yards on first down. We got to make it 6 yards. And a way to do that is having a changeup. And what I mean by that is the meta right now in football is turning every year. It's becoming more and more outside zones, Shanahan, Kubiak, those type Alex Gibbs teams. Everyone's running it. I mean, zone's never going to go away, but now who majors in it is becoming more and more prevalent around the league. The problem when you do that, when it becomes the meta, the major is the counters start happening on defense. The fronts start changing. The looks start changing. Special rules start happening, and you see the evolution. This is the best part about football. The evolution on both sides, the arms race that happens. So
well, let's just think about that Patriots-Rams Super Bowl. Just think about that kind of back and forth with the 6-1 widening out. That's what you see with those sorts of fronts, is you see those guys widen, so you can't get to the edge on those plays. It's that back and forth always.
The angles are messed up, so it just becomes a wash battle where it's just guys walking down the line, and it's like you hope the running back sees the one hole that's on the backside or something like that. And even with
it's an arms race for how many guys you can put up along the line of scrimmage. Who's playing first?
One guy just pops. You're just waiting for one bubble to pop somewhere. And that even with the Rams, because even when they came back the next year, they were still having some issues because defense was starting to copy that. And they came to some fun plays. Like they started running duo a little bit more, but they also ran, and I wasn't even going to talk about the Rams here, but it's great. It's perfect. Is they ran this other play that's been one of my favorites to watch the last couple of years, is this wind-back play where they use Kupp or Woods as the lead blocker. And I love it. But it's what they're doing is they're just playing on their zone steps and getting the whole defense to flow with it. And then a wind-back it's like zone blocking counter, basically. There's no pullers, but it's counter. And that's the best way I could describe it. And
it's a de facto pull by pulling that guy back across the formation. It's achieving the same thing to a certain extent.
But without a guard, it's a single puller instead of two pullers. That's a good way to look at it. And it's usually a tight end or a fullback or something leading with that. And the Rams, they use Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods in such a fun way as blockers. They have those guys as the puller, as like a lead blocker, and it's awesome. It's such a fun play. I do think it's going to become more prevalent around the league. But also just other teams, the 49ers. They've been running more in trap and gap schemes. And this is just, it started 2 years ago, but last year, Shanahan started leaning heavily into it, where it's kind of becoming like, whoa, it's like 50-50 that you're seeing zone or some trap or gap scheme now. And that's one change up that's happening. Really, it's a fastball 1A, 1B. You got the Titans and Packers. Zone, zone, zone. They have split zone that they like to run. They started going to duo a little bit more once teams started countering them. We talked about on this podcast before was the Titans, they started running duo. I believe it was against the Texans late in the season. And there's a couple more, like after that, they leaned more into it. And even the Bucks, the Super Bowl champion Bucks, they really only have 3 runs. They run inside zone, they run split zone, and they run duo. But that's the same thing. It's like a pitcher having 3 really good pitches and going like, you know what I'm going to bring you, but you have to pick which one. So rock, paper, scissors battle. And that's the one. But
that's why those counters are so great, right? And that's why they had that gash run in the Super Bowl. It's like, even if you have those 3, if you go outside of those 3 one time, it's going to be that monster play that you need if you're only running the ball 20 times a game.
Yep. And that's where that changeup comes in. And that's a heavy, heavy changeup. And this is, and on the negative side, I know we're talking about this is one of the top offenses, don't get me wrong, but like the Chiefs sometimes had some struggles in the run game. And one of their things that just what I noticed throughout the year, because I watch the Chiefs every week because I just want to watch Patrick Mahomes, is that they spread everybody out. Kelsey is a de facto receiver. He's not even in line sometimes. It's like they're basically going 4 wides out of 11 personnel. And what happens is you limit your run game that you can do in that. It's usually in the NFL, it's draw or zone. I mean, that's really what's going to come down to. And I would see a lot of times that defenses were like, okay, we'll spread our defense out and we'll let you have that 3 to 5 yard gain. We're fine with it. As long as Mahomes is not doing Mahomes, we'll let CEH get his couple yards. I actually think that's why some of the Orlando Brown and the Humphrey pick from Oklahoma at center is to get those pullers, because I do think they're just going to maybe lean into some different types of runs out of these spread formations. So I do think that's where they're trying to find their changeup, because they became so predictable in my eyes that I was like, man, I just know what run they're going to run. They're going to run inside zone right here. And defenses were like, yeah, that's what they're going to do. It's like, we'll take that over Mahomes shredding us for 40 yards a pop. So I think that's really what they're going to lean into too, is that I think just that's what I took away from watching some of these really good offenses. And the Saints, like, that's one of my favorite run games to watch, is because they have that changeup always. They run a little bit of everything and they run it really well. And that's always just really fun to watch. So I do think just changeups are going to become more developed, especially with these teams that are going to become all running the same looks or similar looks with the outside zone stuff coming around the league.
What is your favorite way that the Saints kind of keep teams on their toes? Because I looked today, I was surprised that they were first in rushing DVOA last year. Like that, it makes sense. I mean, like, they're so well coached and they do everything so well every year. But I was looking at the rankings, I expected Baltimore or Cleveland even, or a team like that. When I saw New Orleans, I was like, man, again, like, it's just every single year it feels like they're right there. What is your favorite thing that they do?
Well, okay, so like a good way how they use Taysom Hill is they're going to get you in the personnel they want you to be in. They did it 2 years ago.
He's a personnel dictator. That's exactly what he is and always has been.
He is. And that's his advantage. I know he's a freak athlete, but dictating what personnel you want. The one I remember, this is 2 years ago. It's not last year, but they were playing the 49ers during the season, and they had Taysom Hill in there, and the 49ers were matching with sub personnel, with nickel personnel. And so the Saints are basically in 12. They're in base personnel, base offensive personnel, and they just ran duo. So they just were just pounding it down the middle, just over and over and over. That's what I like that they do. They don't run too much crazy stuff. They just get in the perfect personnel groupings, and then they'll do one shift in motion. And they run duo really well, so of course I'm going to love it. But also they just run a little bit of everything. They'll run a split zone. They'll get you leaning. They'll run 3 plays out of the same look, and then they'll have a play action off of it. They just tie everything together. And I think why younger guys in that offense have a little bit of issue is, yeah, it's the same play, but then they'll window dress it, and then so it gets called something completely different. So guys I think are just going like Drew Brees can do it because he's ran the offense for a decade. But so many guys I think are just like, okay, I'm lining up here in the slot. I'm motioning over, because how it's old school terminology. So I just
he's
love
also
how
maniacal with the details. He like it has to be every inch, and like you talk to guys there. Peyton, he's famous about he'll go onto the field and like drop his hat in like a specific place on the field, and like it's to the inch. Like they are really particular about that stuff. I can understand why someone not used to that level of detail might have a little bit of a hard time acclimating to what that's like.
Yep. And I just think that's what it is. It's just that window dressing they do and the detail of it. That's such a great point. That's what it is. They're just so well coached. That's why you watch the Saints, you always know what they're trying to get done, because it's just everybody's doing it the proper depth. Everybody's lined up perfectly. And there's Drew Brees now retired, RIP, but him going to the right guy every single time. So it's such easy tape to watch because you know it's always being correct. But that's what I love about it. I still say if you want to watch a goal line offense for the last like 3-4 years, just watch Saints goal line offense and short yardage offense. Statistically, they go up and down, but they just do a lot of good sound running scheme, and they run a little bit of everything, and they just know how to get you how they want you. If you're going to tighten up on duo, they're going to run toss to Alvin Kamara. Like they just know every changeup to the run that they have of that week, their staple of that week. They know what the changeup's going to be, and Sean Payton's one of the best play callers. And I mean, right now, and probably in the last decade, he knows when to call it. So it's just fun stuff. The Saints are just such a fun offense to watch.
It's been fun watching guys who are sort of zone evangelists go away from it, right? I mean, I remember I talked to John Benton, who's now the offensive line coach for the Jets, but he was with the 49ers, and it was before they played the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. And I was talking about some of the little wrinkles that Shanahan throws in. I think I've told the story before, but we were talking about when they started incorporating more of those power gap runs into the offense. And he told me that it was the Pittsburgh game of that 2019 season. It was probably week 5-6, because Pittsburgh's outside linebackers play so wide that they just didn't think that they could run their outside zone against that sort of look. So if they're widening, what makes sense to do? Pull guys and let that width work against them, because you want to kick them out anyway. So if they're already wider, that's why those plays start to work. And I think that the changeup eventually became just a part of the fabric of the offense. Yep. And now John Benton's in New York with the Jets. You'd assume they have that baseline of, all right, we know if they're going to start doing this, we have this basket of now big gap runs that LaFleur and Benton ran with the Niners. In Cleveland, Stefanski, if you look at what they did in Minnesota the year before he got there, zone, and they crushed people with it. I mean, that offense was fun, and Dalvin Cook was cooking. And then you bring in Bill Callahan, who's from a very different background, a more varied background, and you see all the gap and power runs that are folding in, because it's just the best way to keep your running game explosive. Like you said, it's the best way to get the bang for your buck if you're just harder. This is such a simple way to put it. It just makes you harder to defend. And that may seem like a simple way to talk about it, but so many teams, especially with the zone game, because a lot of coaches that are from that background think that unless you are 100% dedicated to it, it's going to fall short. And that's why watching people mix it up a little bit and understanding that we don't have to do this all the time. We know how to do it. We're not going to lose the efficiency of it by going to a couple different sorts of running plays. And I think it's a great point. It's been really fun to watch that change happen over the last couple of years.
And just what you're speaking to with the Steelers stuff, the fronts that we're going to see more and more, we're getting back into bear fronts and the tight and mint fronts that we've talked about endlessly on this show. And when you get a head up nose and guys covered, it's so hard. Everything just washes down. Like we talked about the 6-1 stuff, but in those fronts, the angles on gap stuff, especially counter, is just so good. And counter got its name because it's a counter play. it's a change up. So you're going to see more and more pullers because just the angles are so much better for these teams.
Because you can't get double teams
throughout the league.
You can't. It's just so hard to get double teams.
No cloth. No cloth. Yep.
I was watching, who I was watching yesterday. I think it was the Titans. And I was watching, there was a couple teams that were running those tight fronts against them. And they were trying to do it. It's just like, you don't have the double teams. They're just, the numbers aren't there. It's so hard to run against it if you're not creating angles or creating an ability to have movement in some other way. And I think you're right. There's just going to be more and more of that. This episode is brought to you by Freshly. We all know that dinner time can be stressful, especially during the week. It's currently 6:35 p.m., and I have no idea what I'm going to make for dinner tonight. I don't really feel like cooking, but I also don't want fast food. And that is where Freshly comes in. Freshly offers chef-made, nutrient-packed, delicious meals delivered fresh to your door, no cooking required. Grocery shopping and cooking can be a pain, especially right now. And with Freshly, you don't have to do either. Your meals arrive cooked and fresh every week, so you can keep your fridge stocked and skip a trip to the store. Ordering is easy. Visit Freshly.com and choose from over 30 delicious, satisfying, better-for-you meals like steak peppercorn, sausage baked penne, or their chicken pesto bowl. Freshly can fit your lifestyle with a variety of plans and meals to pick from that work for your dietary needs, preferences, tastes, and family size. And now our listeners can try Freshly for just $6.16 per meal. Stop searching the internet for healthy food near me every night and start living life freshly. Your meals are always delivered fresh, never frozen, and are ready to heat and enjoy in just 3 minutes. With new meals added each week, Freshly brings the convenience of chef-made, nutritionist-designed classics right to your kitchen. Right now, Freshly is offering our listeners $40 off your first 2 orders when you go to freshly.com/maze. Stop stressing about dinner. Go to freshly.com/maze for $40 off your first 2 orders. That's freshly.com/mays to get $40 off your first 2 orders. Breaking news. This important PSA is brought to you by manscaped.com. This is your public service announcement and the news you've been waiting for. The Manscaped engineering team has confirmed that they have successfully created the Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, which is now available for purchase in the US and Canada. The new trimmer was just released only moments ago, and we were one of the first ones to get our hands on it and share the news. Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer for you. 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code MAZE at manscaped.com. I'm one of the first people to try the new 4.0, and I've been blown away by the performance. The craftsmanship and details on the 4.0 are next level. Their advanced ceramic blade and skin-safe technology is so good that it's almost as if Manscaped worked with the best engineers in the world to ensure it's as safe as possible. What makes this trimmer different than all other trimmers? A new multi-function on-off switch can engage a travel lock, created for people who like to travel. The Lawnmower 4.0 gives you the ability to turn the 4000K LED spotlight on and off when needed for a more precise shave. The new trimmer even allows you to customize your trim all over through additional guard lengths. The optimized Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer is waterproof, so you can groom in the shower and not have to worry about making a mess on the bathroom floor. There's also wireless charging available. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code MAZE at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use code MAZE. Unlock your confidence and always use the right tools for the job with Manscaped. So speaking of the Titans, my first lesson here is sort of Titan specific, but it talks about the league more broadly. The Titans their play action game is an NFL outlier. It's very, very different than what a lot of other play action offenses in the NFL look like, and it's arguably the best one. And watching them compared to some of the others is a reminder that play action is ultra efficient. We know that. I'm the ultimate preacher of the play action gospel here. But I think that it's watching the offenses that I did really was a window into understanding that there are different ways to do this. There are different ways to incorporate it into who you are and who you want to be. And with the Titans, the thing that really jumped out, and this is how this stuff happens, just to give you kind of a window in the process. It's really fun. So I said, all right, I'm going to watch every explosive 10 or more yard Titans play action completion. So there's a service that does that. It's True Media. It's great. You can organize it. It's really, really useful. So I start watching them all. And as I'm watching it, I think, man, they're in max protection all the time. Like, these are a lot of 2-man routes with both of the wide receivers. And so then I start playing with the filters. It's like, all right, how many times compared to other teams are they using 6 guys in protection? And it's 6 is a lot because it doesn't include the running back in those plays because he's not actually protecting. So it's always at least a tight end or a fullback. I was like, oh man, more than anyone else. How many times is it 7? How many times is it 8? And so you look at the numbers. They use 6 to 8 guys in protection on play action on 77% of their play action attempts last season, which was the highest in the league by a lot. And because I wanted the percentage, because I wanted to know it wasn't just a volume thing because they use so much play action. For example, just for some context here, the Browns did it on 100. The Browns had 126 play action plays. 81 of them only had 6 to 8 guys in protection. The Chargers used it 55.8% of the time. The Niners, another team we associate with a lot of heavy personnel, 61% of the time compared to 77 for Tennessee. They're an outlier. And when you watch that play action offense, it's so interesting to see that approach where they have made a declaration that it is more important for us to have the bodies to protect and attack you with 2 guys. We think that is the best way to do this, and it consistently works for them. And why I think them compared to the Browns is so interesting is that in my mind, I thought, is it because they're in 12 and 21 and all these heavy personnel packages all the time? Do other teams that line up like that use these sorts of protections as consistently? And the answer is no. The Browns ran more play action throws out of 13 personnel than any other team in the league, And they're not even close to the Titans, because what the Browns are doing in their play action approach is saying, we're going to have all these big bodies on the field to keep you in base. That is what we want to do. That is the function that it is serving. Even if we have 2 or 3 tight ends, they're releasing out into routes. We want to get bodies out there. The Titans are doing it as a way to steal bodies back in protection from different places. So the Browns are doing all of these boots, and they're all the nakeds. They're getting Baker out, and that's why you don't need as many guys in there to protect, because you're getting on the edge. The Titans do very little of that. They're dropping straight back on play action and going vertical down the field, and it's like, for example, when you watch the Niners do their split zone play actions, the tight end coming back across the formation, you see it all the time. You can picture it. He's running a little slice route into the flat. That's what he's doing. The Titans, he's stopping at the tackle and sealing the backside off consistently. Same with the fullback. That's what they do. They're just trying to use all of those heavy personnel to have sneaky ways to make their protection better, rather than trying to get you in base and sneaking those guys out in routes. And I think that's such a fascinating contrast to what teams like San Francisco or Minnesota or Cleveland do, and offenses that we would say come from the same family. But when you actually watch it in practice, it looks much, much different.
Yeah, and also that added benefit of just you're changing up the attack points on those pass rushers, like where the blocking's coming from. And that's just an added benefit of just like, it's just slowing them down. You know, okay, yeah, it might be a tight end who's an okay pass protector that usually that edge guy should blow up. But if that guy, edge player, doesn't know how to pin his ears back, like edge players know to crank it up on third down. Like we just think O-line and quarterbacks and maybe a couple other guys are going to be smart. Defenders know when they get paid. So they stat watch, they box score watch too. So they know on third down or even second and long, they're like, hey, this is a heavy pass down. Here we go. But it's like they know how to pin their ears back and get it going. If they know it's a basic look, but all of a sudden if you're motioning the guy in, or whoa, why'd that left tackle step down? And all of a sudden the tight end's just grazing you. And then it's like, okay, well, I have to wrong shoulder this, or I have to play him square up, or is the tight end going to slip me? And they told me to slow down the tight end. If he it's like you're just causing them to slow down. And that's the human element of all this. That's amazing. Because it's like, yeah, you're not hitting them hard like you think in football. It's more like, no, you're winning the mental game on them, just some little mental edge on it. No, and attacking in different ways in play action always just fascinates me. Like when the Rams came on the scene, or McVay came on the scene, I should say, and how they got to everything in play action, or I'm sorry, how they got to all these play action stuff out of no huddle has still fascinated me to me to this day, because that's something I kind of taking what you're saying is because the Titans did it really well as well. And that they'd be in these no huddles, hanging huddles, and they can get to all this stuff because it's becoming such a base concept for them. And that's something that's just, it just makes sense to me. And also just, this is such a better way to create explosive plays.
Exactly.
Because again, like we're tying in with the run game stuff, a lot of these reads are touchdown to check down. That's just a shorthand way of saying it, but it's gash or check it down. And like, live to play another day. And sometimes, like even watching the Rams a few years ago, how many times you see Gurley just barreling down the sideline after he catches a check down, and it's like, yeah, that's what this can create. You see Derrick Henry doing it a couple times, even with his hands, and it's like just finding ways to attack that middle area, that seam bender area, dig area over and over again, and rather than dropping back and having a genius brain QB back there just always knifing it and willing to throw over the middle on these tough, God mode throws. It's like, hey, let's just create easy looks. And guess what? We still gain 22 yards. And guess what? We're protected. So we might not have the best talent, but guess what? We're scheming you up. And you could see it as a way just to lift the bar for everybody. And that's what's so cool about these concepts. And it's just that, and this philosophy of offense is tying all the looks in together, is that a lot of this stuff is day one, day two base install stuff for everybody. But then people get away from it because they're like, no, we got to put in our drop back game. We got to put in our long passes. We got to do our quick game stuff. And as opposed to just going, hey, what about that day two play action concept that we ran? And we haven't run since day two of training camp. Can we run that again? Because it worked in training camp for 40 yards a pop. So let's do that. So that's what it's always just interesting to see. You brought up the great point of those guys, Tannehill, especially with the Titans, that it's that hard play action and it's just a nice tight pocket. And how the action, I guess is the best way to put it, is very fascinating to me as well. You see the half roll stuff. You see the full boot stuff. You see which run concept they're doing the play action off of. Like recently you see more and more with a puller again, which is hilarious because that's tying into our first point about the gap runs coming back. Yep. So now we're seeing
that's Patriots 101, baby.
Patriots 101, and they do it the opposite way. Oh, I know. Also, the Bucks love it now too. They run all that trap pass, and it's just hilarious just to see the guy pulling out there. But that's what you're going to see. It's just there's different ways to attack it. That's another one. Bruce Arians, his play action game is completely different than all these guys. He runs it off a duo, and it's duo to doing his stuff. I mean, it's just so cool how. Well, we all consider, we just say play action and we think it all looks the same. It's like you can just do little tweaks that affect the defense in such different ways.
It's fun because the Titans really love a formation where they have a receiver to one side and they have this kind of tight trips to the other side where both tight ends are on the same side and then the third receiver is there. So it works in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes the third receiver will insert and then do something off of what looks like duo because we've seen that with the Bucks. Think of Chris Godwin doing it. The Titans fold that in a little bit more. Sometimes one of the tight ends will come across the formation in jet motion to be a flat controller. Sometimes he'll do it a little bit slower. And the best thing is, we're talking about the wrinkles in the run game. The little wrinkles off this stuff is easy money. So the one time where that slice, instead of cutting off the backside, does slip a guy into the flat, it's 15 yards to Jeff Swain without blinking. Or you have Blasingame, instead of sealing the back. There's one play they did. I just love it. It's an I formation. He shuffles a little bit to the left, and then he goes to the backside to seal it off. And they do it consistently. And then one time, he slips it, and it's a 20-yard gain to your fullback without even having to do anything about it. Yep. And that's what they do so well. Again, it's not a ton of stuff. It's actually like 4 or 5 things they do over and over and over again with a little wrinkle off of it. Think about the Ravens game where Corey Davis, instead of coming across, went back outside like 2 or 3 times against Marcus
Peters. Our favorite play of the year because we were so excited to see that. It was like the ultimate change.
And that's exactly what it is. And I just awesome. Think that it's so cool. And again, you watch them and you think, again, these offenses are in similar families. They come from similar places. And then when you watch the little tiny differences in approach and why they work, it's so interesting. I don't think the Browns play action game is that much less effective than what the Titans do. But philosophically and in practice, it just looks so drastically different. Even aesthetically, it's like, this looks like 2 different versions of football, even though we would lump them in to a similar sort of idea. All right, what's your next one?
And you get to fund screenplays too, which is the best. Which is like
been a lot. The Browns crush that stuff.
I know.
Their screen game
another
is disgusting.
We're not going to talk about, but that was another thing I was kind of like looking at. I was like, man, I want to really study all these screens that we have going. but because of motion, so I'll bring up the next point.
So the one thing I want to say actually before we move on, I tweeted this and I want to plant my flag on it. I think Tannehill is limited compared to like the great quarterbacks. I definitely do. He's not. If you put him in a situation where he doesn't have every advantage like he does on some of those play action concepts, you see the cracks. But that guy in that offense is perfect. It's perfect. His ability to deliver the ball accurately over the middle of the field, the timing on some of that stuff, and he is tough as shit. And that comes up over and over and over again. He just gets destroyed on so many of these plays, and it doesn't matter. He stands in there. And the other thing I thought was really interesting is that on those plays, just think about it in your mind, that one guy on the outside usually runs off, and then the backside guy coming across on that deep over will just run behind it. The Titans he'll run that bench route to the play side, and that gives you 2 receivers that you can throw the ball to. And that's why it works, because every once in a while, they'll throw that little bench route to A.J. Brown, even though he theoretically is supposed to be the guy running off on that play, which I think is just a smart way. Yeah,
because you don't. It's not a true crossfield read. Is the throws coming into your window? So it's just like as a quarterback, the adjustment isn't. I'm just making up a number here, but it isn't 9 inches. It's 4 inches as far as turning your body and everything. And that, like you said, it just makes it so much easier on the quarterback.
All right, what's your next one here?
So I really do think, and this is watching a couple teams, especially Packers and Chiefs, is motion is just going to become more and more important. And not so much just doing a motion. And I think we've already gotten past that point. I think everyone and their mother knows everyone's motioning now. I'm saying how teams are getting more creative with how they're using the motion guy. It's almost like you almost want to look at CFL film to like get ideas now. But it's not just the jet sweeps. It's especially jet sweep motion. That's going to be the most common. It's just a nice blanket term. But instead of those just becoming flat routes or just a runoff guy and being a check down, now they're becoming wheel routes. Now they're becoming seam routes. And all these top offenses, they run versions of switch vertical now, all go RB seam. We all love it. But also in the run game, because you got teams like the Ravens and the 49ers, and they use these jet sweep motions as like a full speed kick out guy, whether it be a fullback like Juszczyk or just a receiver like Willie Snead.
The Ravens did it with Willie Snead all the time.
Because that's all he's going to be good for there for what they needed. But yeah, they use him as basically a fullback. But that's the thing is when you use those types of motions and you're changing, again, it's attacking angles differently. But I'm curious too, is what is the next step going to be off of that? Because if I were watching all that and being like, shit, like as opposed to the running back all go running back seam, and they went up the seam, they had the running back running the outside wheel. They had the running back coming back and running the post or the big over route. Like, it's like, okay, what's the next step? Can we run a full route tree with a guy off of speed motion? Like teams are going to you become more comfortable with it. Like you really do. We talked about Aaron Rodgers, who never wanted motion before. And now he gets motion all the time. And he's like, okay, this isn't so bad. And it's because you just get used to it. You get used to what the rules are and all the looks are. And
the protection rules, especially. As the quarterbacks get more and more used to the protection rules off of all of that movement, I think you'll be able to sell some of the old dogs on it more than you could before.
I've come full way around on it as a former quarterback. I went, no, I don't want motion at all. Like, no, screw that. But then when you do it day one install, that's another Kyle Shanahan thing, is that day one install, those first plays, they didn't just do a blank static play. Shifts and motions is in the terminology and the verbiage. Day one, first play of training camp. So everyone just gets used to it. Everyone gets used to every type of look. And really what got this whole point out of me is one, creating 4 strong looks out of this is because I think that's going to become more and more prevalent around the league as teams are going to become more and more creative with creating 4 strong looks. Usually it's 3 by 1.
The Packers did that a
ton. And because especially that Rams game, as more people copy what the Rams and Fangio have been doing, I know it's not evolutionary, but how they're doing it's just a nice tie-in. Teams are going to start trying to create overload looks. So different ways. It used to be if you were in a 3 by 1 look and the running back was strong towards the trip side, that was a sprint out or a run play. It was like those are only 2 plays you can run. You're going to run a sprint out because the running back has to seal the edge, or you're going to run a zone going the other way. Now it's like, well, he might motion back. He might sprint motion out. He might just create all this overlap and communication issues because they have to communicate. Match coverage requires a lot of communication among defenders, or at least being on the string. So I think you're just going to see more and more of that. And really what brought this whole point up was when I was watching the Cowboys and watching Dak, and I just noticed how slow their motions were. And it was just cross formation motions, just old school. We're going from 2 by 2 to 3 by 1. Okay, readjust, look at the look. And it was like the defense was like, okay, hey, rotate, trips down, left. And it's like, okay, it's a little different. And that's what maybe watch these other teams going like, yeah, jet motions and what you do with it, that's going to be the next step for everybody.
One play that I think that I noticed a couple different times during the season, the Rams ran against Washington when Woods went from left to right and got instantly vertical up the left sideline for a long touchdown. And then the Bills ran the same play to Isaiah McKenzie. I want to say it was in the Niners game, but it was the exact same idea where he's coming left to right in jet motion and getting vertical instantly. And I just don't know what you're supposed to do about that. I mean, when the numbers are changing that quickly and you have somebody getting that vertical, and like you said, if defenses start to adjust, does that guy sit down?
Yes.
I mean, then what happens? Because there's obviously an answer to it, but if you're having to haul ass to stop that, you're in a position of complete desperation and you're scrambling. So if you're scrambling to stop that, is there going to be stuff that can then come back underneath because you're so worried about that vertical shot down the sideline? It's just that little back and forth and what's next steps and everything else is always so interesting.
You're trying to create edginess. Like we talk about like pass rush and all that, but like mental edginess. You're just trying to create that little split second of uncertainty. It's a game of inches. So if you're an inch slow, I'm going to take that advantage. Like, because that inch might be 3 inches this time, and all of a sudden it's a wide open guy down the sideline as opposed to a covered play. It's just changing up the looks. We make fun of them a little bit, but also we harp and we want to critique coaching and everything. It's like these guys are really, really smart at what they do. So they're going to watch a lot of film. Me and you did it for a week. They do it all year round.
Exactly.
So they're gonna see these things that we're seeing, and that's why just the back and forth that happens with this stuff is so cool, because then rules could become normal. Like that's why I was bringing up that 4 strong stuff with the jet motion stuff, because that was kind of crazy. It's like now teams are kind of comfortable going 4 strong, and now you're getting, that's actually, hold on, that's a whole nother point. But that's why you're going to get into just teams get comfortable with that. And also you'll see one team go like, we're going to have a running back do this and the tight end do this on this route concept. And also other teams will go, oh, you can do that. And we have film of it. Coaches sometimes can't, I just complimented them, but they can be a little bit lack of creativity. Unless they see it on film and see somebody else doing it. And they're like, oh, it's possible. Let's do it now. Everything else is theory. So I think we're going to just see more of that as this year goes on.
So I mentioned that Isaiah McKenzie play against the Niners. I wanted to talk about the Bills and something I learned watching them and how it applies to some other things. So I was digging through some of the numbers, and the Bills ran the most passes against man coverage in the NFL by a lot last year. It was 246 of them, especially when you compare it to the percentage of total passes that they had as a team that was winning all the time. And I was looking at it and I was like, why the hell did the Bills, who were very, very good against man coverage last year, face more man coverage than any other team in the NFL? And I think the answer comes from several different places. One, they play against the Patriots and the Dolphins twice a year, which if you look at it, that's a ton of it. So, I mean, having 2 Patriot Belichick-tinged teams in the division does that. 2, do you know the Bills were the most blitzed team in the NFL last season?
That's crazy.
They faced more blitzes than anyone else in the league. It was over 200 of them. A team like the Colts or the Ravens was half that number. And these are not rate stats. These are just total numbers, but still jarring. And so when I was watching the Bills, I went back through all of their 10 or plus yard completions against man coverage, it was so interesting to watch. And then I watched a couple other teams and what they did against man coverage. And to me, the takeaway was there's no one way to do this. There is not one way to attack a team if they're playing man against you. So when I was watching the Bills, it was just an excuse to watch a lot of Stephon Diggs, but I really was just watching the Bills. So Diggs had 61 catches against man last year, most in the league. And when you watch what the Bills do against man coverage, it's a lot of different ideas, not one thing, but they really try to get guys coming across the field. They make you defend every single inch. And they can do that for a few different reasons. One, Allen can hold on to the ball because he can create space for himself and he has the arm strength to let it go late. So you see that all the time. Just types of longer developing plays that would just not be on the table for other teams are on the table for the Bills. And the other thing they do is they spread you out. A lot of 3 receiver sets, a lot of guys. We watch so many different offenses now, whether it's the Titans or any of the Shanahan teams, any of the McVay influence teams. It's all tight. It's all tight to the line of scrimmage. The splits for the receivers are very, very small. I mean, in Tennessee, it's crazy sometimes. You got guys just standing next to the tight end on both sides. The Bills,
feet are overlapping.
Yes. The Bills are much different than that. The formations are much, much wider, and they're really making you defend the whole field. And watching that in comparison to a team like the Colts, right? So you watch the Bills, 81% of their completions last year against man coverage went to wide receivers. It was the highest rate in the NFL, which is a ton. It's not surprising when you consider how they're built, but it's a ton. And then you look at a team like the Colts, 54% of their completions went to wide receivers. But the Colts, weirdly enough, if you look at, again, all of these numbers are fascinating to me. If you look at it, the Colts had the most completions of 10 or more yards last season against man coverage in 5-man protection. So let's think about that. Why would that be the case? Because they don't get blitzed, so you don't have to worry about keeping it back in, and you have Rivers wanting more guys out in routes. So you compare that to a team like the Colts or a team like the Bills that's never in those 5-man protections, but is also like all of this stuff and just the different ways you attack man coverage is one of my favorite things to watch. Yeah. So the Bills, one of the things they love to do is they had that nub strip look where they'd have the tight end on one side and they'd have the 3 receivers on the other side. And what you can do is then you can play with who is the number 2 and 3 receiver on that 3 receiver side. So sometimes they'd have Diggs there, and he'd be the one running that over into all that space, or he'd run a little return route instead of doing the over, or Beasley would do the same thing, or from that number 3 spot, he'd instantly go vertical. And it's just a very similar look, but all the different little variations of it that they had. And again, then you watch the Colts, and they're not doing any of that big over stuff. There's a lot of mesh, but it happens much, much, much quicker. And they'll have little pick routes where the tight end is clearing out. They'll have the running back out running a slant with the tight end, running a little slant flat. Just all of these different ways the teams attack man coverage, as I think more and more defenses are going to embrace that man look or that man heavy approach. I just think that the amount of different ways that teams are dealing with it is definitely worth paying attention to.
Yeah, and what you're getting creative, like what you're talking about with having like Diggs at the 3 spot, that's the Tyreek Hill spot as well, is the defenses, they adjust. Like we've talked about a few times on this podcast, is they start coming with rules to common looks because they have to know what they're going to defend, whether they're going to install during training camp and every week of the year refer back to. And that's why it becomes so much more jarring when you watch a team, actually like the Cowboys is one of them, and seeing how static their routes are. And we've talked about this before. And you just see stop routes, which used to be good when you played against spot drop cover 3 and cover 4 and all that. That was fine. And it converted to a go against cover 2. And the corners have just gotten so much more physical and handsy. Even with the rules, they just know they're better at staying on top. So stop routes kind of, I don't know. It's a whole trickle down thing. But that becomes so much more like jarring. You're like, oh, getting those guys on the move and running away. It's just a common thing, or just human, physics. Like just, I'm going to be easier to get open if I'm running away from this guy as opposed to stopping and hoping to throw him by. Like we're not all that athletic. But the reason the defenses are going to make all these rules and like the speed at 3, we've talked about before. But there's a reason like the Seahawks defense, the Legion of Boom, all this match coverage now everyone's running, they were comfortable having their linebacker carry that number 3 spot on over routes because it used to be
Bobby Wagner.
And having Bobby Wagner helps too, yes. But it used to be a tight end there. Yes. And tight end there. So really you could put anyone there. It's like, okay. Then teams started putting speed at 3, and then it's Bobby Wagner. It was like, oh, Bobby Wagner's really freaking good when all of a sudden you see him running 35 yards downfield with a guy that runs a 4.4. And it's like that, but that's why you're changing up where everybody's at. It's the same X's and O's. So like if it was just X's on a board, it's the same. But now it's an X, it's an H instead of an X. It's a Y or an F instead of a Y. It's a Z instead of an H. You're just changing up what each spot is. You're talking about, man, some of those calls are match calls, and sometimes you can get the defense to waste a guy. Say I didn't have Travis Kelce and I just had some shit tight end. I could split him out and we have a corner wasted on him if they're in a match coverage, which plays out like man. And then all of a sudden I have my number 3, my best receiver. What used to be we would call an X receiver, but really it's X receiver means number 1 now. I mean, let's be honest. And okay, now he's over there, and you might just have your nickel if he's in the number 2 spot. Okay, or you have your linebacker trying to run with them. They might be in dime. You might have a safety rotated down. It's like you're
watching Jamal Adams try to stick with Stephon Diggs on some of those plays.
Oh my God.
It did not end well, and that's the fun part of watching it. Is that
Jamal Adams versus Edelman wasn't pretty either.
And those are the matchups that you get. And like you said, it's the X's on the chalkboard. Just flipping Beasley and Diggs. Yeah. It gives you something different. It gives you a different flavor on the exact same sort of play. And watching the Bills do all that stuff, and they ran a couple straight weeks. There was week 9, I want to say, against Seattle, and then week 10 against Arizona. They scored 2 touchdowns off of it against Arizona from the 21-yard line on 2nd and 1. And the only difference was they flipped Diggs and Beasley, and instead of going across the field, Diggs took it vertical for the touchdown from the number 3 spot. And it's just like those little tiny things. We make the game so complicated. And in reality, it's just like, all right, we're going to do this thing the exact same way with this one tiny little tweak, and that's how we're going to get explosives. And watching the Bills just go to that same look, Knox on the left with that nubs look, and that nub look, 3 receivers on the right, and just do little tiny different variations of the same stuff, especially against man, is so cool. And then that brings me back to the kind of the man point in general, is that they're all spread out. They're using space to their advantage there. And the Colts, for example, They're not like that. They're using the bodies to their advantage. They're getting guys on rub routes. They're creating space rather than using space across the field. And just having two offenses that are really, really good at attacking man coverage do it in such different ways is really fun to watch. I truly think that we underrate Frank Reich as an offensive play caller and that offense in general, because when you watch it, how easy it is at times, the space they create for guys, even though they don't have offensive stars, is really, really impressive. And some of that is Rivers, right? So if you look at a lot of their explosive plays against man coverage, it's him understanding exactly where the pressure is and the back filtering out. It's so many different things he can do that a lot of other guys can't. But I still think that Reich is underappreciated when it comes to putting his guys in spots to succeed.
He does the classic thing like we talked about with Sean Payton, and that it's not the craziest plays in the world. Match has been around for 2 decades now. It's just the window dressing on him. It's getting into 13 personnel. It's getting into 12 personnel and running something vertical. It's all that. I completely agree. I think he is very underappreciated. And that's another thing too. We talked about with max protect and heavy protection stuff with the Titans, and now like the 5-man protection stuff. Just different ways to get vertical against teams.
Yes.
And I think there's just now becoming such a willingness for teams. Chiefs are leading the way. They can get away with it a little bit with Mahomes. But even with God, of course, I'm going Mahomes and Rodgers. But the Chiefs and Packers, but teams are realizing, okay, every time when you installed 5-man protection, it used to be it's just quick game. That's what it is. It's quick game. The ball has to get out. Like it just has to get out. Teams are now going like, oh, we can do some of our 5-step concepts, like 4 verts. We can do, that's what switch verticals, the RB the one I brought up a few times on this podcast. It's a 5-man protection. It's a deep passing play, but it's 5-man protection. That's scary. But these new play callers are getting more creative and more willing, and offensive line coaches too, because now they're having answers, either a built-in hot or 1, 2, 3 out of the gun and the ball gets out right away. And teams are becoming more and more willing to do that. As opposed to, it used to just be, no, it has to be quick game because otherwise you're taking a sack. Now guys are like going like, oh, we can get after defenses more vertical, creating explosives with 5-man protection. And a best way to beat all the blitzes and all these funky pressures that defenses are bringing now, either max protect it and sort it out, or you go 5-man pro and beat it with the throw. And I just think that's what teams are going to lean to more and more. Just a great way to beat man. You're beating all those pressures. If you go 5-man, you get all 5 eligibles out, and they're trying to match it somehow, you can really create a lot of strain on defenses.
This episode is brought to you by Credit Karma. If dreams of vacations and enjoying the fun of life are turning back into reality for you, they certainly are for me, don't let concerns over financial setbacks keep you from saying yes. Credit Karma helps keep your financial goals in check, so you won't have to hit pause on a good time ahead. Credit Karma's game-changing technology shows you tailored offers for credit cards and personal loans that you're more likely to get approved for, so you can apply with more confidence. They use your credit and other financial information to show you custom recommendations. Whether you want cash back, travel rewards, or to consolidate debt, Credit Karma can help you find the offer that fits your goals. With a selection of options and approval odds, you have the power to make informed decisions. Credit Karma. Apply with confidence. Go to creditkarma.com/maze to learn more and find offers tailored just for you. That's creditkarma.com/maze, or you can see your offers on the Credit Karma app. Apply with confidence today. Go to creditkarma.com/maze or the Credit Karma app. Growing your business takes more than offering a popular product or service. It's essential to have the right people in place to ensure your company operates smoothly and has the potential to expand. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the best candidates for free. Get started by posting your job for free to reach LinkedIn's network of 740 million professionals. Fill out targeted screening questions to get your role in front of the most qualified candidates with the experience, skills, and motivation you need. Then use simple tools to filter and prioritize the top candidates you'd like to interview. LinkedIn Jobs will help you hire the right person for your role. And your first job post is free. Just visit linkedin.com/maze. Again, that's linkedin.com/mays to post your first job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So you talked about with Mahomes and with Rodgers and those guys. And it came to mind when I was watching Josh Allen today, but it was something I was thinking about while watching Justin Herbert last week when or 2 weeks ago, we were doing the quarterback draft. And my last lesson here, and this is the last thing we'll talk about, I think and this is, again, it's going to sound simple, but I do think it's a huge point in the league right now. If you don't have one of the guys, you're in trouble. And the reason for that, obviously that sounds so stupid, but it's not that you need a good quarterback to succeed. When I was watching the Bills and watching so many of their explosive plays, I tweeted one of them today. It was the touchdown to Diggs in the back of the end zone where Allen spun out to his left. There's just so many plays where it's like, go do something, Josh.
Yep.
Like, just make it happen. And the ability of a quarterback like that, or like Mahomes, or I think like Justin Herbert or Lamar Jackson or some of these guys, to make a defense wrong even when they're right, is a sea change in the league to me. I mean, to me, it's such an important moment. And I think we've seen that moment permeate the league and the choices that teams have made. The Rams looked at what was happening with Jared Goff and said, he's not good enough. He is not good enough. We need someone that has one of those top shelf arms, and they went and got one. The Niners looked at what was happening with Garoppolo and said, this isn't good enough. We need one of the guys. And all of the stuff that Kyle Shanahan has said about playing against a Josh Allen and what you learn from having to stop a guy like that, that to me is a huge, huge part of the game. It's the Mahomes effect. It is, the rest of the teams around the league looking at their guys and just saying, this is the guy we have to beat. That guy is not going to be able to do that. And understanding that, and that's okay. And it is. It's okay to be one of those quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And to know you need one of those guys, it was so stark watching Josh Allen play and just seeing how many shit situations he was like, you know what? I'm fine. I'm going to roll out, or I'm going to hang on to it, or I'm going to throw the ball back across my body. And I just think that defenses are so complex. There are so many good ones. There's so many good teams. You need a guy who is going to be able to manufacture offense all on his own. And again, I know that sounds simple. You need a good quarterback, but I just think it is so apparent when you watch these teams right now.
Completely agree. And that's something, I think this is like the best point we've come to on this podcast, is the ability to create at the quarterback position is not something you want anymore. It's a necessity at the position now. You just have to be a good athlete, or at least be able to throw on the move and get something with your legs. And that's another thing. If teams want to run more and more man coverage, or teams want to blitz more and more, you know how you punish that? QB running. Because that is very frustrating to have guys on the move and the DBs have their backs turned, or linebackers are trying to look stuff up, and then all of a sudden they turn around, there's a quarterback running scot-free 15 yards and sliding and give them the first down signal. That's very frustrating for a defense. And that's why the 1 to 2 to scramble is becoming more and more prevalent with some of these reads and stuff. The West Coast offense, the traditional old school 90s, late 80s, 90s West Coast offense that came around the whole league, the worst thing that happened was everyone expected the quarterback to be Joe Montana and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and make the perfect read every time. And then you watch Mike Holmgren go to Green Bay, and you see Brett Favre just saying, "All right, fuck the read. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go scramble and make a play." What's nickel personnel again? Like, that's kind of what he did, and that's what every guy kind of has to do now. It's like, okay, and I think coaches now are, instead of going like, "This is my shit, you have to read it right," they're going like, "Hey, go make a play, be a football player." It's a necessity. It really is. It's sometimes you need those quarterbacks to just go get you a bucket. And that's just what it is.
It's a great way to put it.
It really is. NBA is the best example of it. You can have this best offense. I saw the Jazz a few years ago, ran the super efficient offense, great movement. They got to the playoffs. They couldn't score anything because they couldn't have a guy that could get them a bucket. And just because the defense is locked down, all of a sudden those NBA players start trying in the playoffs on defense, like for all 48 minutes. Don't get me wrong. They try for most of the part. But it's like, now all of a sudden it's like, we just need a guy that could just win. And that's what sometimes you need at a quarterback. There's a TV trope. And it's off the Marx Brothers. And I just thought of this when you were talking, and it just says, Harpo, go do something funny. And they say that's the greatest compliment you could give to a comedic actor, is they have no script for you. They just say, go do something funny. And they took it from the Marx Brothers. They just put, Harpo, do something funny. Sometimes the quarterbacks just go do something funny. Like, just go. And Josh Allen's the number one example of that, because watching that Rams game, especially, that was the one I watched a couple days ago.
Yeah.
And seeing the match coverage and everything passing off perfectly, that thing is all timed in the defense's head too. If I hold this guy for 1 second, 1 Mississippi, all right, move to this guy, 1 Mississippi, ball should be out or we should get a sack. But if you have a guy that's also using his legs and ad-libbing and extending the play, those